Resident Evil didn't need to be this good. After all the remakes, after Village divided the fan base, after years of the series constantly switching between horror and action, expectations were stable. We expected something polished, maybe safe, maybe familiar. Requiem could have played it safe. Instead, it feels intentional. I realized that during the opening walk through the city. Fog swallowing the streets, old hotels barely visible in the distance, cold lights reflecting off empty windows. It didn't feel loud, it didn't feel desperate to impress, it felt controlled. For a second, it reminded me of the Silent Hill at its peak. Not because it copied it, but because it understood restraint. The atmosphere wasn't trying to shock me, it was letting space do the work. And underneath that quiet there was something else, that primitive uncertainty I hadn't felt since Resident Evil 7. The fear of not knowing what's behind the door, not because enemies are everywhere, but because they aren't. That's when it clicked. This game wasn't reacting to criticism, it wasn't chasing nostalgia, it knew exactly what kind of tension it wanted to build. And when Leon steps in, something surprising happens. The game doesn't break, it grows. Resident Evil has been living with two identities for almost 20 years. The original games were about restriction, limited vision, tight space, armor that forced you to choose your fights. Fear came from hesitation. Then Resident Evil 4 changed everything. It gave you control, a clear camera, aggressive pacing, it was brilliant, but it permanently shifted the balance toward action. Resident Evil 6 pushed that action too far, spectacle over dread, movement over vulnerability. And Resident Evil 7 pulled the franchise back. First-person horror, claustrophobic design, intimacy instead of scale. Village tried to combine those philosophies. For some players it worked, for others it felt segmented. Horror in one section, blockbuster in another section, two moods stitched together. And Requiem doesn't stitch, it blends, and that difference matters more than it sounds. The first time the game truly slowed me down wasn't during a boss fight, it wasn't during a scripted scare, it was during a section where I barely had control over my safety. You're moving through darkness with nothing but a lighter to see where you're stepping. Not to fight, not to defend yourself, just to understand the space in front of you, and then the rule becomes clear. The creature roaming the area won't touch you, but only where proper light exists. Under working lamps you're safe. Step outside that circle and you're exposed. That changes everything. The lighter isn't protection, it doesn't stop the monster, it doesn't scare it away. It only helps you navigate. It lets you see the floor, the walls, the shape of the corridor. But safety only exists inside those lit pockets. So now the environment becomes the mechanic. You start planning your movement from lamp to lamp, you hesitate before crossing darker stretches, you listen for audio cues, you wait for the right timing. The fear doesn't come from a jump scare, it comes from geometry, from distance, from knowing exactly where safety ends. I didn't sprint through that section, I calculated it. And that's a difference between cheap horror and design attention. Most games give you a weapon and say, survive! Requiem gives you boundaries and says, move carefully. That's not louder, it's smarter. Going in, I expected Grace to be transitional, a character you tolerate until Leon arrives. That expectation disappeared fast. Her gameplay isn't weaker, it's precise. She feels vulnerable without feeling useless. You see it in her movements, you hear it in her breathing. The fear in her voice isn't exaggerated, it's restrained, which makes it believable. She isn't writing as someone waiting to be saved. She investigates, she reacts intelligently, she survives without becoming a superhuman. What impressed me most wasn't that her sections were good, it's that I never rushed them. I didn't think, let me finish this so I can get back to Leon. That confidence from developers, they trusted her role enough not to overcompensate, and that trust really pays off. When Leon enters, the tone shifts, but it doesn't explode into chaos. Yeah, combat becomes more assertive. Yeah, there is more direct confrontation, but there's a way to him, slight friction, a sense that he's experienced but not invincible. That subtle change is important. Requiem doesn't try to recreate Resident Evil 4 energy exactly. It respects it, but it doesn't copy it. Leon feels mature, and this maturity prevents the tonal shifts from feeling jarring. Grace builds vulnerability, Leon releases tension, then the game cycles back. This rhythm keeps you engaged because you're never stuck in one emotional register for too long. That's pacing done right. The option to play in first person or third person could have been surface level flexibility, instead it becomes another layer of control over tension. First person narrows awareness, corners feel tighter, sounds feel closer to your ear, the environment presses against you. Third person gives you a spatial awareness, you see the threats more clearly, you regain confidence. What makes it work is that fear doesn't disappear when the camera pulls back. The systems remain consistent, the vulnerability is still there. It's not two different games, it's one design adaptable. And that's harder to pull off than people think. Requiem understands that horror doesn't need to be constant. The city breathes slowly, interiors aren't overloaded with enemies. Empty rooms exist and they matter. When something finally interrupts that emptiness, it hits harder. The color grading stays disciplined. Early sections lean into cold tones, warmer lighting appears with purpose. The sound design deserves attention. Silence isn't treated as wasted space, it's tension waiting to be activated. Too many modern horror games trying to overwhelm you. More enemies, more scripted moments, more chaos, but Requiem trusts quiet. That trust builds faith. There are moments where the resource loop slows momentum. Backtracking to gather crafting materials can feel slightly repetitive. It's not broken design, it's not poorly implemented, but there are points where you feel the friction. The thing is that friction is a part of Resident Evil's identity. Scarcity forces preparation, preparation builds tension, and still balance is delicate. A few sections stretch that loop longer than necessary. It doesn't ruin the experience, but it's there, and acknowledging it keeps the price grounded. Now there's the part that elevates Requiem beyond just being a good entry. Look at modern AAA games. Huge open worlds, endless checklists, skill trees stacked on skill trees, systems built to extend engagement instead of deepen experience. Horror doesn't thrive in that structure. Tension requires focus. It requires controlled pacing. It requires the ability to limit the player without frustrating them. Requiem chooses density over scale. It doesn't try to be everything at once. It doesn't inflate its runtime with distractions. That's a risk in today's market, and it works because the game understands that the fear and bloat don't coexist well. Even small details contribute to immersion. Collaborations with real-world brands like Porsche and Hamilton watches could have felt intrusive. They don't. They integrate it in a way that makes their world feel grounded rather than commercial. Subtle enough not to distract, but real enough to texture. Graphically, the Resident Evil engine continues to deliver precision. Lighting behaves naturally, faces carry subtle emotion, Grace's fear shows in her posture and micro-expressions. Leon's movement reflects physical history. These aren't flashy additions, they reinforce tone, and tone is everything here. The moment I fell in love with this game wasn't explosive. It was during that first city reveal. The fog, the color palette, the quiet. It was signal. Requiem isn't choosing between horror and action, it orchestrating them. It takes the intimacy of Resident Evil 7, the structural clarity of Resident Evil 4, the production confidence of the remakes, and instead of layering them awkwardly, it integrate them. That's the difference between mixing and merging. Village mixed, Requiem merges, and that merge is what makes it feel unified. If you're new to Resident Evil, Requiem works as an introduction because it shows both sides of the franchise. You get stealth and vulnerability, you get controlled action, you get tension built through space, not just spectacle. If you're a long-time fan, there is lower depth. There are echoes of older entries. There is a fan service, but it doesn't dominate the experience. It respects legacy without being trapped by it. That's maturity. Resident Evil didn't need to be this good. It could have relied on nostalgia, it could have overcreated over horror, it could have leaned entirely into action. Instead, Requiem feels deliberate. Grace embodies fragility without weakness. Leon embodies experience without an instability. The game understands that tension lives between those states, not in choosing one, in balancing both. That balance isn't loud, it's controlled, and in a franchise that spent years feeling split between identities, Requiem finally feels unified. Not perfect, not revolutionary, but confident, and confidence is what makes this entry special. That's why it works, and that's why in 2026 Resident Evil doesn't feel divided anymore, it feels whole.